Welcome to the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast. Hi, I'm David Manti, and welcome to a new episode of the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast. With me today is Steve Gutterman, CEO of Falcon Brands. Thank you very much for joining me today, Steve.
Thanks for having me.
All right, before we get started, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You could also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. Finally, if you want to contact the podcast, you can reach me at david@cannabisequipmentnews.com. All right, Steve, let's get started. How did you get involved in the cannabis industry?
Well, it's a great question. I actually spent most of my career in financial services. I was in online financial services for a long time in the late 90s and early 2000s. I was with E-Trade. And the cannabis industry was the first industry since that I'd seen since the late 90s and early 2000s that reminded me of those days in online financial services where you just felt like there was this amazing, unexplored set of possibilities that was stretching out in front of you. And so I've been in a variety of industries over the course of the last 25 years, but to be involved in an industry where we're literally going from zero to 5, 10, 20, $30 billion in legalized revenue in just a handful of years was and is incredibly compelling.
So what was the day like where you realized you were going to make the jump from finance over to cannabis?
Well, there had been a couple stops in between in private equity. And then I was the CEO of a market research firm that did market research primarily in Africa. Great company, but also a very slow moving industry. And I more and more saw myself kind of looking at this emerging industry and saying, that's where I want to be.
Mm-hmm. Now, I've talked to a few leaders now that have a finance background. Is there anything in particular that brings a professional from a finance background into cannabis that makes it a good fit?
Well, I would put it a little bit differently. What I would say is that cannabis is no different than any industry in that you gotta run a good business. And so at our company, Falcon, which will get to, I'm sure, in more detail, we really pride ourselves on blending this kind of authentic OG street cred with this world-class professionalism, where we have people from Pepsi and Coke and Ford and Black & Decker and Kohl's and Nordstrom's and from E-Trade and also some people that have been in the industry for 10, 15, 20 years and were in the industry before it was legal. And, when you combine those kinds of competencies and when you combine a sense of precision and professionalism with this passion and, kind of love for what you're doing, it's a good combo. And so I think the people who have successfully, now to answer your question, the people who have successfully made the jump from finance or other industries are ones that A, can apply the same set of good business principles that you'd apply anywhere else, and B, have a real appreciation for what makes cannabis unique and authentic.
Was Harvest the first stop?
Yeah.
What was that experience like?
It's great. And I have a lot of respect for the leadership at Harvest and a lot of really close friends who continue to work at now True Leaf. And it's a great company. And I think that they've earned every bit of their success.
And then you moved on to general cannabis, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Sort of what facilitated that transition?
Well, interestingly, in 2018, you may remember this, David, there was a general consensus amongst companies and investors that bigger was better. And that if you had 50 licenses, that was great. And if you had 100 licenses, that was even better. And if you had, as we did at Harvest, 154 licenses in 14 states, that was better still. Mm-hmm. And the evolving realization that the market and business people in the market had is that in cannabis, that's not always true, right? And in cannabis, it's actually better to be deep than broad, meaning it's not necessarily a great thing to be operating in 15 states, 20 states, 25 states, right? And so Harvest, for its part, decided to shrink from 14 states to really focus on 4 key markets. And other companies did the same thing. And kind of thinking about that same thesis, I went over to General Cannabis, which also happens to be located in the state that I'm from, on the idea that it is better to be deep and broad than broad. And then that's why I came to Falcon, because we are one of the leaders in California. We're one of the largest companies in the state, and so we're really focused on taking what we've already built and expanding throughout the state.
When you say it's better to be deep than broad, are you talking about in terms of a product portfolio with in a single state versus reach across the U.S.?
Yes, and what I mean more specifically is that in almost every industry besides cannabis, there are economies of scale that you get from being really, really big. But you can't get those in cannabis. So if you're operating in 10 states, you have 10 totally autonomous operating units. And yeah, you can save a little bit of money on HR and accounting and maybe technology, but that's about it. Maybe some, you don't have to hire 10 sets of executives, but other than that, you are building duplicative processes and facilities and operations in every state. So when I say it's better to be deep than broad, you're not creating, by going into multiple states, the kind of efficiency that you would in any other industry. And right. So the most successful cannabis companies are the ones that have done a lot of things really well in their state or states of operation. And so for us, that translates into doing a lot of little things and big things well to generate the success that we've achieved. We've generated revenue of over $100 million a year for the last 3 years. And wow. We have done that by creating brands that customers love. We have 6 great brands. 3 of them are consistently in the top 10 to 15 best-selling brands in California. And we have, to support that, we have a little bit of cultivation, although we're building out more and we're acquiring more. We have massive manufacturing and processing facilities where we have machines that are operating the machines, and then a robust QC and packaging department. And then we have massive distribution capabilities. We're actually one of the largest distributors in California, even though we only distribute our own products. And so we're delivering our products to 350 dispensaries every week. And then we have 1 retail store, and we're opening more. And so when I say deep, for us, what that means is that A, we've created these products that really resonate with customers, and then B, we've done all the things necessary to support the growth and development of those products.
You said Falcon is one of the largest companies. Is Falcon the largest cannabis company in California?
Well, for a long time, we were and I believe we still may be, the largest cannabis taxpayer in California, okay, which either makes us the largest or the most honest, or some combination thereof.
Okay. So talking a little bit about operations, how did you build a scalable operating model at Falcon?
Well, there's a couple things. First of all, you got to start with a great team. And that's true in cannabis. It's true in any industry. And our team, like I was saying before, is just a bunch of experts. And we have people who have been involved in cannabis a long time, and we have people that have been involved in other industries for a long time and really know what they're doing. So first and foremost, you got to start with a great team. And then secondly, we've actually taken a long time and frankly a lot of money to build our platform, and so we've spent about 6 years and $50 million building this platform. And so it's funny, there are sometimes people that come to us and they say, I've got this great brand and you need to help me get it out across the state. And we'll look at them and we'll say, actually, with due respect, you don't have a great brand. You have a great PowerPoint. And that is a cool looking logo. I'll give you that. But that's different than having a great brand. Having a great brand means having all those things in place that I was talking about before, right? It's having a QC department that's checking to make sure that the quality of your product is exactly the same each time, and that you have a stickering room where you're putting all of the required disclosures and warnings on the packaging, and then it's put into airtight packages, and then another package, and then it's sent out. And then, if you're telling dispensaries that you're going to make it, you're going to show up with a pallet of goods at 10 a.m. on a Thursday, you show up at 9:58 on a Thursday, right? I mean, that's a brand. That's delivering on a brand promise. And so when you say, how did we get to scale? It took 6 years for us to be an overnight sensation.
Very good. As you're building, how do you manage capital equipment expenses, and how do you determine, when you're ready to upgrade equipment to suit your needs as you expand?
That's a great question. So for us, the question is always, it's exactly what you just said, right? It's how much use can you get out of your equipment, and at what point are you upgrading? And, so for us, we're always running very rigorous analysis on what's the incremental yield we think we can get out of upgrading or replacing equipment, and is it worth the cost, right? Or do you just hang on with the lights that you have or the equipment you have or whatever it is for another 6 months, year and a half? And so there's no exact algorithm, but that's the equation, right? It's incremental yield versus incremental cost, right? And as far as I was just say, as far as financing, we're fortunate. We've traditionally had good access to capital, and we continue to. There are, as you know, it's been capital in cannabis has been an evolving story, right? And so in 2018, capital was relatively easy to come by. In 2019, not so much. 2020, a little bit better. Then the pandemic, not as much. And, right now we're at a place where getting capital is very difficult. And so if you are not a company like us that has good channels and good access to capital, or you're not one of the larger MSOs, you could be in trouble.
As you're, in other industries, there are, tried and true life cycles for equipment. Since cannabis is so new, are you kind of, when you bring new equipment in house, are you kind of just figuring it out as you go, or is there an expected product life expectancy?
Oh no, there's definitely an expected life expectancy. Mm-hmm. And you are right that there have been some significant technological improvements in lights, in equipment over the past 3, 4, 5 years, but that still doesn't mean that you don't have expectations for what the machine or the light or whatever it is that you're producing is going to do.
So you previously mentioned that you're looking at acquiring more cultivation. What do you have cooking?
Yeah, well, for us, just to kind of level set, we are one of the largest wholesale buyers of flower in the state. And so we have a wholesale group that is really good at what they do. And there's some of the real pioneers and experts in the industry. And so for us, even though we do that every month, it's really an expensive proposition. And every pound that we could grow ourselves rather than buy represents a significant savings in our cost of goods. So we're very focused on adding cultivation of all stripe, outdoor, greenhouse, indoor, to support the continued development of our products. And the other thing is that we're always thinking about how best to get our products into consumers' hands. And traditionally, we've done that by selling to dispensaries. It would be reasonable to think that we would add additional legs to that stool. And so that we would add direct to consumer via retail and then also via delivery. In other words, we want to be multi-pronged in our approach in how we can get our products into the hands of customers.
You mentioned having pioneers on staff, and you also mentioned, bringing people in from other industries. How do you determine when someone might be a better fit from being within the industry or maybe looking outside?
Well, that depends on a couple things. The first is obviously what's the job? Right. And so if we're talking about somebody who's going to run a cultivation facility, it's mandatory that they have cannabis cultivation experience. Right there, you can't fake that one. And so I don't care how many years you've been growing tomatoes or growing watermelons or whatever you've been growing. If you haven't been growing cannabis, you're not going to be cultivating. You're not going to be a lead cultivator for us. And so the first and foremost is what's the position. The second thing, though, is what's the fit, right? And so for us, we have a bunch of people that care deeply about our company and about our customers and about the product and the product experience. And so if a person is not the right cultural fit, if the person isn't just absolutely crushed every time a product appears subpar or isn't elated every time we find out that somebody is loving what we're doing, then they're not going to work out here.
One of the things that I love about this industry is the passion of nearly every employee in it. I want to talk a little bit more about automation. So do you have a good mix of automation on the floor versus, processes that are still done by hand, or do you lean into automation?
We lean in. And this is a really good example of how difficult it is, and frankly, how costly and time consuming it is to get to scale, but why it's such a big advantage when you do. I'll give you an example. We have a stickering machine, and that allows us to change labels and then apply them to products really on the fly. A very expensive piece of machinery that if you were a smaller company, you wouldn't think of, nor even if you thought of it, could you afford. But for us, when we're making literally millions of widgets, it makes sense. And so for us, we continue to think about ways that we can automate. That's both in our equipment and then also in our ERP, where we're really trying to do as much as we can all the time in not just automating our processes, but automating our flow of information and making it as efficient as possible. And so that's something we have always leaned into and will always lean into heavily.
What is the company's approach to new product development?
Well, again, you got to start with people who love the product. And we have a product development group that use the product, whose friends use the product, colleagues use the product, who are out in the market seeing what's interesting and hot. And so product development for us starts with that. And then you kind of see what's going on in the market, and you try to think ahead. For us, really, we tend to think about two variables. We think about convenience and effect. And so one of the things that's been interesting is that, and you'll appreciate this, David, is that sometimes it feels like in the cannabis industry, we're just trying to replicate success in other businesses, in other industries, right? So for example, beverages. I'm not a particular fan. Now I could be wrong, right? But I'm not a particular fan of beverages because the efficacy isn't the same as some other products, and B, they're just a pain in the butt to ship and store, and C, if you're a dispensary owner, now you got to have a big glass case and you can't really put a lot in. And so just because that's been an effective medium for alcohol and for other kinds of products doesn't necessarily mean that it's the most convenient way to consume cannabis. So for us, we think about the traditional ways that people can use flower socially. It's a very social experience. Obviously, vapes, edibles. We think things like strips, like Listerine type strips, are very interesting because it's kind of the opposite of a beverage, right? Where you can put 15, 20 in a tiny little package. It's a dispensary owner's dream in that sense, right? Yep. And then secondly, what's the effect, right? Some products you want to sleep, some products you want to go to a party. Sometimes you want to feel contemplative or introspective or studious, and we need to be able to nail that in all cases. And so when we think about product development as a team and as a company, we're always thinking about how can we optimize along both of those variables.
So flower is still king. Will it stay that way?
Yeah, I think so. It will continue to go down as the dominant way to consume cannabis. And so if you look at flower as a percent of total consumption 10 years ago, 5 years ago, you're talking 70, 80%. That's gone down and really varies by state, but call it somewhere between 40, 45, and 60% of all sales. We believe that, look, it could go below 50% in California and in other mature states, but it would probably still remain the single largest source or category for consumption.
Okay. As you're getting deeper as a company, how do you make sure to protect the brand, and how do you make sure to ensure a consistent consumer experience?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's one of the things that we're maybe most proud of, right? And so we are fanatical and obsessive about the quality of our products. And that's reflective not just in everything we do, but even in the names of the product. And so our most popular product is called CRU, CRU. And it's a double entendre, right? It means, first of all, hang in with your crew. It's a social thing. But cru, the way that that's spelled, comes from the French wine categorization. And we really look at cannabis selection for cru in the same way that a vintner would look at grape selection for a bottle of wine. Right. And so when I say that we're fanatical and obsessive about everything that we do, what I mean is we start from the beginning and we want to make sure that it's the absolute right quality and strain that we put into our products, and then that it's well made. And then we have a QC process to check it. And we're constantly checking in with customers and dispensaries about how we're doing. And I think that that's one of those things that if we hadn't nailed that, we wouldn't have continued to be in the top 10 in products every year. You know, we're proud of the fact that our products have stayed in the top 10, 15 in California year after year after year when our competitors kind of come and go.
Yeah. If you can be fanatical about product quality as you're sourcing product, do you have any apprehension growing cultivation, knowing that, you know, maybe a little bit more is on the line if it's your own grow?
No, to the contrary, we feel better about it because we'll control even more of the process.
Okay. What are some of the parts of the process that are out of your control right now that you wish they were doing a better job at?
Oh, no, it's not that. It's not that other growers aren't doing a good job. It's just we are when you're buying on the wholesale market, you're dependent on other people successfully growing what you want.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, we'll always have a presence in the wholesale market. We'll always be buyers. And in addition to that, if we can be producing our own to exactly the specifications that we want, then that's a good thing.
Okay. I read that you said the evolution of cannabis is not over. So what is the next chapter?
Well, I think what we were just talking about is where it's going, right? So how can we make products as convenient as possible, and how do we optimize and maximize the effects that we're trying to obtain? We know very little as an industry about the cannabis plant, and we know a lot more than we did 5 years ago, 10 years ago, but there's hundreds of cannabinoids, and how they all work together is still a bit opaque. And so we're going to continue to get better at that as an industry. As a company, we're going to continue to develop products that like I said, really hone in on both convenience and effect.
Is Falcon always going to be, focused on California, or do you see the company expanding into new states and new markets?
The answer is yes on both. Right.
Okay.
And so what I mean is California is our home base, and there's a massive amount of opportunity here. California, as you know, 34 million people, $7 billion in legal sales, going up, rich history of cannabis use. So it is a fantastic market in which to operate. It's also a difficult market, right? I mean, there's onerous taxes and regulations, and so you got to be good, right? And you got to have scale. And to get to scale, like we've talked about, was expensive, long, painful, but here we are, right? So we're one of the largest companies in the state, and yet we still only have a couple of percent of market share. So number one, we're going to continue to expand here because we can, and there's room, and the market's highly fragmented, and there's a ton of opportunity. Then we will also look at other like states. So states that are geographically proximate, more mature markets that don't necessarily have a limited set of licenses. In other words, states like California, where you can come in and winners win and losers lose. And we feel pretty confident that we can replicate the success that we've had here in other states. And so specifically, we'd look at, when I say geographically proximate and like characteristics, we're particularly focused on Colorado, Oregon, Washington, Nevada. These are states that we think that we'll do very well in.
But does the allure of like New York opening up fully, is that too attractive to not look at?
Oh, well, listen, we'll look,
Yeah.
and we'll look at anything, right?
Yeah.
But I'm not convinced that the ROI of the cost of getting into those markets is prohibitively expensive, right? And so if you think about what a single license in Arizona costs, or a single license in New York costs, those things can be 20, 30 or more $1 million. And so, when you compare that to the entry costs of some of these other states, I think it's a more compelling case when you look at return on investment to focus on states like California, where A, we've had success, and B, we can get into the market much, much cheaper.
So you mentioned that you have facilities all over, like in multiple places in California. How are you, when you're servicing 2 million customers per month, it has to be a tall order to make sure you maintain that level of quality and make sure you guys stay at the top. How do you do it?
Yeah. Well, look, the truth is that we run this company like a world-class CPG company. And admittedly, there's no Coke in the industry yet, but we really try to emulate the Cokes, the Pepsis, the Diageos, companies that create great products, and then more importantly, deliver those products and deliver on that brand promise every month. And so, if you toured around our facilities, what you'd see is that the widget is that we're producing is cannabis, but the processes that we're using and the equipment and the ERP and all of those things are very similar to what you'd find in world-class operations in other industries.
Okay. You know, coming from a background at Harvest and General Cannabis, what were some of the changes that you made at Falcon based on previous experiences, sort of to make it your own?
Oh, actually, I think it was really the other way. Falcon has such a great history and such a great team that coming in, I always felt that my job was to clear as much of the brush away and create the right capital structures and create the right corporate structures to allow this amazing team of experts to just do their thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the way any great company succeeds, and it's particularly true in the cannabis industry where you are trying to kind of marry that professionalism with authenticity. But we're such a big company and we're such a monster in the state that this is not about what Steve Gutterman or the 2 or 3 or 5 founders of the company are doing. It's about this amazing team that we've built and this amazing platform that we've built can do, and just kind of watching it go every day, every week, every month.
What was some of that brush that you had to clear?
Oh, it's the same brush that you'd clear for any company, right? It's making sure that we have the right capital structure to continue to grow, making sure that strategically we have the right pathways to grow both organically and through acquisition, and then making sure that the team is happy and inspired to continue to build what we're building.
Do you have a personal connection to the cannabis industry?
No. And as a matter of fact, here's my admission. When I first got into the business 4.5 years ago, 5 years ago, I looked at the industry and I said, well, I'm not much of a user, and I don't really know what I think about cannabis, but God, this is amazing that this industry is going to grow so quickly. And I want to be a part of an industry that's going to grow faster than maybe any industry in the history of industries. Mm-hmm. Now, an interesting thing has happened over the course of the last 4 or 5 years. I have become a real believer. And I've tried more of the products and I enjoy them. More importantly, though, I've really become a believer in the value of the plant. And I've seen it. I've seen people who have epilepsy who all of a sudden are able to treat their epilepsy where they hadn't been able to with anything else. Or I've seen people that have had massive anxiety that use cannabis and are much better, or couldn't sleep and are now sleeping, or just want to relax and unwind after a hard day or a hard week. And so I would tell you that I started out with really no connection to the industry or to the plant, but after being around both for 4 and 5 years, it's hard not to have a connection, and it's hard not to really believe and understand in what we're trying to do here.
Is there something from the Falcon Brands portfolio that's your favorite?
Well, yeah. I mean, I have my whole kind of. I like everything we do. The Crew disposable vapes come in a bunch of different cool flavors, and they're really easy to pop out. So that's my go-to.
Okay. One thing I always like to ask is expectations on when this industry might become federally legal. Do you have any expectations, or are you kind of just, have you thrown those out the window?
Well, I think that I may have thrown those out the window.
Yeah.
Meaning, look, the Safe Banking Act is in front of Congress, and maybe the sixth time is the charm. Maybe it's not, right? I think like most people who look at the industry think that that this will happen in phases and stages, right? So maybe the passage of the Safe Banking Act, maybe the passage of a couple more pieces of federal legalization before full decriminalization at some point. What I would tell you is, number one, I think it will happen at some point. Mm-hmm. Number two, I think that cannabis companies, and particularly public cannabis companies, will get a massive lift when that happens in valuation, and maybe a series of lifts in valuation as if it progresses in stages. And then number three, it doesn't really matter for us operationally. And so what I mean by that is, our job is to create a great company and to produce great products for customers, and to do that every day. And if we can do that in the way that we have and continue to build off this great platform, then regardless of when, how, where legalization happens, we're going to be in a good place.
What's next for Falcon Brands?
More, and more, right? So more of what we do really well, more products to more customers, and expanding through California and then ultimately into other states.
Excellent. Well, it sounds exciting, Steve. I wish you nothing but the best. I think you guys are just crushing it right now.
No, thanks a lot. I really appreciate it. And I've enjoyed talking to you today.
All right. Before we get out of here, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You could also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. Finally, you can reach the podcast. You can email me at david@cannabisequipmentnews.com with email the podcast in the subject line. Oh, I'm also supposed to remind people that cannabisequipmentnews.com is a website that services cannabis professionals. So if you get a chance, check it out. Maybe subscribe to our newsletters. All right. For Steve Gutterman, CEO of Falcon Brands, I'm David Manti. This is the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast, and we'll see you next week. Thank you for listening to the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast.